Okay, we will go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'm Carrie Ballinger. I'm the superintendent of Rockcastle County Schools and the chair of the Superintendent Advisory Council. I apologize for the technical difficulties that it seems that we're experiencing, but we appreciate Natasha and her help in trying to correct these. I will remind you that the Superintendent Advisory Council gives advice and input on matters concerning education policy to Kentucky's Education Commissioner. Before we get started on our agenda, I want to welcome and congratulate our newest members. Joining the Superintendent Advisory Council for this year is Buddy Berry from Eminence Independent, Robin Cochran from Washington County, Bob Lawson from Henderson County, Chad Molly from Erlanger Independent, Sherry Satterley from Frankfort Independent, and Seth Southard from Ohio County. I'd like to congratulate and welcome each of you to the Superintendent Advisory Council, and I look forward to working with you in this capacity. As a note, please ensure that your video is streaming and that you are visible during the duration of the meeting. Your microphone should be muted when you are not speaking. However, all discussions must be available to the public, so make certain that your mic is unmuted when you are speaking. At this time, I'd like to ask Commissioner Glass if he would like to add anything or if he has any comments.
Thank you, Dr. Ballinger. It's good to connect with everyone, at least electronically. As all of you know, I'm finishing up my last couple of weeks here at the department. I just want to again say what an incredible honor it has been to serve as your commissioner. I have loved the role and delighted in getting to support and work with all of you and the staff at KDE. I'm also excited that we have Robin Kinney on with us. Robin is a well-known person in the state and will be she is an incredible choice for the interim with her background knowledge and expertise, and just enjoys a wonderful confidence from, I think, superintendents and school leaders around the state because of that background and her credibility. So Robin's on with us to listen as well. But with that, I'll turn things back over to you, Carrie, and let you move through your agenda. Oh, and Carrie, you may be muted if you're doing something now.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Go right ahead.
Hey, all right. So thank you for serving in your role as commissioner, and we appreciate working with you and have enjoyed your time here in Kentucky, and we wish you the best of luck in your new role. Hey, at this time, Natasha, would you I'll turn it over to you for a roll call.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chair Ballinger. As we move through roll call, please make certain that your cameras are enabled, and once you hear your name, please unmute. So we'll go down the roll here. Carrie Ballinger.
Yes, present.
Doug Buchanan.
Present.
Buddy Berry. Joe Berkeley. Robin Cochran.
Present.
Tom Cochran.
Present.
Robbie Fletcher.
Present.
Michael Ford.
Present.
David Gilliam.
Present.
Damian Johnson. Bob Lawson. Matthew Matting.
Present.
Misty Middleton. Chad Molly.
Present.
Marty Polio. Patrick Richardson. Sherry Satterley.
Present.
Seth Southard.
Present.
Tim Spencer.
Present.
Robert Tuck.
Present.
And Leonard Whalen.
Present.
Was there anyone whose name I called that you were muted before, but now you're unmuted? I think I missed Buddy Berry.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Joe Berkeley. And I think that's it from my list. If I inadvertently left anyone off, my apologies. Feel free to unmute before we move forward, and I'll make certain to count you.
Damian Johnson, present.
All right, thank you so much. All right, Carrie, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. The next item on our agenda is to approve our minutes from the May Superintendent Advisory Council meeting. Those minutes were emailed to you from Natasha, and she is also going to drop those in the chat box for your review. Since we're having technical difficulties, I will ask when you make a motion, if you will identify yourself in case you're not able to be seen on the camera. I'll give you just a moment to review those minutes. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the May Superintendent Advisory Council meeting.
So moved, Robert Tuck, Butler County.
Okay, we have a first from Robert Tuck. Does anyone want to make a second to that motion?
It's Tom Cochran, Johnson County. I second that.
Okay, a second by Superintendent Cochran. All those in favor, please respond by saying aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. The next item on our agenda is to review the timeline for filling the commissioner's position. We have Mrs. Robin Kinney with us, the current associate commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations, who is going to be leading us through this discussion. Before we turn it over to Ms. Kinney, I would like to congratulate her on being named our interim commissioner. I know that we're all very excited and look forward to working with Ms. Kinney in this role. She will be taking over the role of interim commissioner on September 30th. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Kinney to lead us through this discussion.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Ballinger. It's a pleasure to be on with you today. You are my first official meeting, I guess, with superintendents since I have been named as the interim to start on September 30th. For those that I have already worked with, I really like seeing your faces on today online. And for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of getting to know, I'm sure we'll get to know each other in the interim period. I was asked to come on and just talk about the timeline for the appointment of the next permanent commissioner of the Department of Education. I also want to take just a minute to thank Dr. Glass publicly on behalf of all the Kentucky Department of Education employees and staff. It's been a pleasure working with him over the last 3 years, and we are sorry to see him go. There are many of us here that I would say this is not our first rodeo at this, and it is time for us to once again look toward the appointment of a new commissioner. So it is bittersweet. We've really enjoyed having Jason here with us. He approaches things with a very informal capacity, which is really welcoming to those of us here at the department, and I'm sure has been a good source for each of you in your roles as superintendents. When the commissioner did announce his departure, he announced that on July 31st and indicated that he would be leaving us on September 29th. And so the Kentucky Board of Education immediately started thinking about how we would conduct our process for the search for a new commissioner. And on August 21st, the board authorized the Department of Education staff to put out a request for proposal or a solicitation in order to hire a national executive search firm to help us with our search. The solicitation was posted that same week, and next week, actually on September 25th, that solicitation will close, and we will see what kind of applicants we got to help us with this search. Of course, many of you all are very familiar with requests for proposals, and we will go through the process of scoring each of the applicants that have come in. The Kentucky Board of Education has appointed 3 of their board members to act in that capacity. And of course, they will have technical assistance from us here at the Department of Education. Once we score and select a vendor to be our partner, we'll negotiate with that vendor, looking toward the execution of a contract. And then once that happens, we estimate about 30 days for that to happen. I'll go through sort of the scope of the work that we will conduct with that search firm, because that really tells us what our next steps are and helps us develop that timeline toward the appointment of a permanent commissioner. Of course, that search firm will help us identify potential candidates in accordance with criteria that are identified by the Kentucky Board of Education. They will then help us as we review and screen those candidates for qualifications and eligibility. They'll meet with us here at the department and with the Board of Education to select candidates for interview. And then as part of their scope of work for us, they will also conduct all the background checks. So any candidate that we wish to interview, we'll ask them to do background checks before they are presented to us. The board may change that depending on the number of candidates. It could be once we reach finalists, we'll ask them to do background checks. But then they'll work with us through the interview process. They'll coordinate and schedule those interviews, and will prepare some recommendations to us. To get a feel from what it takes from the beginning to the end, from the time we first appoint this executive search firm to the time that we actually have selected and offer that employment to our next commissioner, I looked at how long it took us the last time to do this, and that was in 2020. We started in February of 2020, and Commissioner Glass joined us in September of 2020. So it took about 8 months from beginning to end. Of course, a lot of that is dependent upon the speed at which we can identify candidates, the candidates that we select for interviews, scheduling with them, trying to make that happen quickly, the length of time for the background checks, all the things that you, in your roles as superintendents, when you're hiring people, some of those things just take a little time. And so that 8 months could be shortened based upon how quickly we can get those things done, or it may take a little longer. The other thing that is new about our process this time is you may be aware that once we get to the appointment of a commissioner, there is a new legislative requirement for confirmation by the Senate of the new commissioner. And so depending on when that happens, that appointment is subject to KRS 11.160, and it defines the process of when we make that offer of employment to that person and try to get them under contract, as to when the General Assembly is meeting. So if we make that appointment and the General Assembly is not in session, that appointment and the employment will start on the date of the contract, and that person will serve. And in the next General Assembly session, they would consider confirmation. If it happens during the General Assembly session, they would take that up during the session, during that General Assembly session that is now happening. So that's sort of a high-level overview of kind of what we have on our plate as we move forward for the appointment of our commissioner. We are seeking input from lots of stakeholder groups. And I think on your agenda today, you have one of our KBE teacher member, Alyssa Riley, who's going to be on there. And she's going to talk to you about two big questions that, in fact, we are seeking your input from as we look toward hiring of our next commissioner. I also wanted to share with you on our Kentucky Department of Education website. If you go out on the KBE webpage, you'll see a link, and we've dedicated a page that will help everyone track sort of our progress on the hiring of the next commissioner. You just go out and you'll see a title that basically says the 2023-2024 Commissioner Search Process. And if you're ever curious about what's going on in between you when you have these meetings or your superintendent meetings, you can go out there and we will provide progress at that site. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and I look forward to work with you in my interim capacity. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me, or I'm happy to take any questions right now if you have questions now.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kinney. If there are no further questions, we will move down our agenda. The next item on our agenda is search for a new commissioner and advisory council member feedback. And leading this part of our agenda is Ms. Alyssa Raleigh, Kentucky Board of Education member, and she is going to be leading an activity to elicit feedback from our advisory council members. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Raleigh.
Thank you very much. I apologize if you hear noise. I work in a CTE campus and we have kids transitioning right now into our building. But I appreciate you all letting me be here today just to get your all's input and speak on a couple of different topics for what we want to see in our next commissioner of education. So I'm going to type 2 questions. I'm going to do one at a time. And I think we have Dr. Meredith Brewer. Oh, she just did it. In there that just typed into the chat the first question that we're going to go over today. What are some qualities you'd like in Kentucky's next commissioner of education? And so if we want to have a dialogue right now, that would be awesome. Dr. Brewer's capturing thoughts. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing out loud, you're welcome to type in those as well. So the floor is open.
I guess I'll start. One thing that I would really like to see is just the consistency as we continue to move forward with the work that the Kentucky Department of Education has already done with things like our Portrait of a Learner and trying to move that work forward. I think there's, of course, a lot of districts that have put in a lot of time and effort with that work, and I'd like to see that kind of put it at the forefront.
Are there others that have comments on what qualities we would like to see in the next commissioner? Remember, you can also add your comments in the chat.
I can move on to the next question if you all are still pondering on it and want to share. I'm sure you all can let us know if anything else comes to mind. So do you want me to go to the question 2?
Yes, go to question 2.
Oh, I think I just heard
something.
I'll also add, I really like the town hall meetings and just having that openness and having regional communication as far as with superintendents and local officials. I think that's very valuable, and it allows more voice.
Thank you, Superintendent Tuck. Does anyone else have a comment that they would like to make before we go to question 2?
Okay.
Ms. Riley, do you want to lead us through question 2?
I think I just heard someone else.
Yeah, David Gillum, Madison County Superintendent. I'll throw this out. I don't know whether I probably should keep my mouth shut on this, but here's what I'm going to say. Since this is an advisory committee, I feel we ought to look strongly at someone that has experience as a Kentucky superintendent, because I think, one, there's a lot of value in that, because we are a unique state system. And I appreciate what our previous commissioners have done and the experiences and the variety of experiences that they've brought to the table. I think you can always look outside, and that helps you grow. But I also bring to the table the reality that the last 3 commissioners that we've had have been caught in the crosshairs of political turmoil. And when we have someone that is not in Kentucky, although Commissioner Glass had very strong ties to Kentucky, it becomes very easy for folks to point those issues at them and be very critical of someone who's trying to do a job, regardless of which side of the aisle they're on. It's easy to treat them as an outsider, and I do feel that that there would be value in having someone who has sat in the Kentucky superintendency seat. I think there will be value in that, in the ability to change that dynamic of the politics that have been created around this position. So I would like the board to give strong consideration to that as they look at the next commissioner.
Michael Ford in Russell County, and I appreciate everything that David just said and echo every bit of that. I think that opportunity and that experience would help them to facilitate jumping on board with KDE and moving forward without there be a big learning curve, and just to help them navigate all the systems within inside of Kentucky with that familiarity. And I also echo what he said. I appreciate everything previous commissioners have done. Appreciate Commissioner Glass. But David, you worded that excellent. Very well.
For that. I'm going to go ahead. Dr. Brewer has put in the chat for question 2. And the next question is, what should the new commissioner focus on in their first year? So I heard Mr. Tuck mention moving forward with the same initiatives, but are there any initiatives or items that we would like to kind of move forward or focus on during that first year that we really haven't done recently?
Remember that you can also put your comments in the chat if you would rather do so than speaking out. I think we do have one comment from Sherry Satterley. Superintendent Satterley says, I believe it is imperative that the focus stay high on the profile of a learner's skills.
Kim Spencer, I think the first year would be probably being visible, making sure it's communicating with the superintendents, making sure that they're promoting the initiatives that have kind of been outlined in the past. The Portrait of the Learner is great, and also building upon that focus of the CTE programs as well as the AP programs, and just being visible and meeting with the superintendents and knowing what the superintendents are directly dealing with on a daily basis.
Thank you, Superintendent Spencer. Does anyone else have a comment that they would like to make in regard to our question? What should the new commissioner focus on in their first year?
I'll answer that question from, just again, personal perspective. I would love to see the next commissioner spend some time, especially in that first year, focusing on culture and climate, and making sure that we have a spirit of collaboration and cooperation between the school districts and KDE, and that KDE is operating from a status of being a support organization for our 171 school districts. I think that would be important.
Thank you, Superintendent Molly. Does anyone else have a comment they would like to make?
I do appreciate you all being willing to share today, and if you would like to add any more thoughts, Dr. Brewer and myself can, we'll be happy to listen to anything. And I know as a teacher, I'm very about how the next commissioner is going to affect what I'm doing on a daily basis. So I know you all will too. So I appreciate you all letting me come today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Ms. Raleigh. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today and to seek input from the Superintendent Advisory Council. Members of the council, if you will note, Ms. Meredith has put her email address in the chat. So if you would like to add input to what you are looking for in the next commissioner, or what initiatives you would like to see the next commissioner adopt in the first year, please feel free to email her privately if you would like to share that with her. The next item on our agenda is one that is, I know, important to my school district, and I'm sure it's important to all school districts across the state of Kentucky, is the skyrocketing construction expenses. And joining us to have that discussion today is Mr. Che Ritter from the Division of District Support. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ritter for an update.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So many light topics today in this meeting. Of course, anytime I talk, it costs everybody a lot of money. So the question really, I think, is one that will not shock you is, we have a lot of projects going on, a lot of projects that are changing because of the cost. In a lot of conversations with a lot of you all, we've heard, anecdotally and basically on a daily basis about changes, to me, significant changes made to these projects in order to keep it under budget or your bonding capacity. And that's it's pretty unfortunate. We've heard the words value engineering quite a bit lately, and basically decisions being made just because the cost have far exceeded what we can afford to build in each of these districts. So we reached out to a few of our construction companies, and I don't think any of these numbers will shock anybody. Without soft cost, a recent project that one construction company or manager mentioned was about $425 per square foot. This is about in line with what we've heard from other districts. If you go around regionally, you may see a little bit of variance there, but typically it's going to be pretty consistent. Another interesting one, and this was a completely different company. In 2020, one of our growing districts built an elementary for about $21.9 million, and they recently bid out a like-sized elementary across town. And what was once about $22 million is now $38.5 million for that district. They said the cost have just gotten, pretty hot in that area. It's down around Bowling Green. So of course, there's a lot of construction going on there. And I want to point out too, I checked with staff this morning or yesterday on nickels. Of course, that's always a topic this time of year. And going back, when you get your tax rates. Right now, we have 23 districts trying to either get an additional recallable or a multiple recallable, and I'll explain that one in a minute. And it used to be we'd have 2 or 3 a year, and that was it. I have 23 districts trying to get that right now, which is just unheard of. And some of the smaller districts are having to stack these recallable nickels into twos so they can afford to do, pretty much anything to get their bonding potential up to be able to afford to do their renovation or, buy land or whatever it may be. So it's really changed dramatically the way districts are tackling their tax rates. And of course, that also means a lot of that money gets restricted and less goes in the general fund and stuff like that. So that's going to be, I think, an issue probably in the next couple of years. We're going to have to try to figure out if costs don't come down. And finally, one thing I think we've talked about before was gap funding. The Capital Planning Advisory Board, over a year ago, there was a list put together based on criteria they asked us for. That list has been updated a few times. This is basically projects that were sort of shovel ready, ongoing, and we provided a criteria to them. And other districts have gotten on the list through, talking to some of the representatives. And we're hopeful that list is still active come session. We're hopeful they're still looking at it. I'm fairly optimistic it's still sort of in the air as far as I think the representative that's kind of shepherded it has really helped push that in front of a lot of different eyeballs over there, which is great news. And I hope it continues because I think it's gotten, the cost have basically gotten prohibitive. And I'll be glad to answer any questions I can if anybody has any.
If I may ask a question, Chair Ballinger.
Yes, go ahead,
Dr.
Dr.
Fletcher.
Fletcher.
Mr. Ritter, one of the things that when you go through the facilities process, when we go through and list our unmet need, there's a certain rate that is required for all of our, I guess, our estimates. So with the increase to $425 per square foot in the K-Fix process, can that number be increased to match more realistically what our unmet needs would look like?
Yeah, I think you may be referring to, is it the insurance replacement cost, which is usually quite a bit lower than what, we would see as an active square foot cost. But I can check into that. I've gotten an explanation on that before, but it's been a while. So let me circle back to you on that and see exactly what we can do on K-Fix for that.
Again, that whenever we're finished, there's always an estimate of the unmet need for each district.
Mm-hmm.
That's really much lower than what is usually there because construction costs, as we pointed out, has skyrocketed. And and there's a certain, I can't remember what the set amount was per square foot that's on the K-Fix number, but I know it's much lower than what the actual cost is.
Okay, I'll check into that.
Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Ritter?
Thank you, Jay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing that there's no more questions, I would like to thank Mr. Ritter for joining us today and also for always being so approachable and helping and being available to answer all of our questions in regard to construction. And that's very much appreciated, I know, by myself and by other members of the Superintendent's Council. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Superintendent Ballinger. I appreciate it.
Okay. Next on our agenda is a discussion of our upcoming legislative priorities. And to lead that discussion, we have with us Mr. Brian Perry, the Director of Government Relations. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Perry.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're quickly coming up on the 24 budget session. So we've got a few priorities to discuss today. Please understand this is not necessarily a comprehensive list of everything that we'll touch on during the session, but it's what we're working on right now. Just a little bit of background reminder information right here. Barring a special session, they won't be back until January. It's a 60-day session, so they'll run right through April 15th, at the end of which we will have a new biennial budget, along with, I'm sure, hundreds of other pieces of legislation that get enacted. So busy time, coming up on the end of the interim period in November. So about halfway through the interim period, but there are still a few important meetings left. So I put the interim session calendar there. So they do live stream all of the sessions, as I'm sure most of you are aware, but you may want to tune into the education and A&R session in October and November, again, as we start to really close out the session or the interim period and ramp up to the session. I think that's pretty much all the background stuff. So let's jump in. So the department has already sent over our additional budget requests, the ABRs. So those are over in the annex at this point. The House has been working on their budget proposal all through the summer. I imagine that process is getting close to wrapping up based on what we've been told. So the ABRs that we sent over, quite a number of them. So these are just sort of the top ones here. And you can see those. I think some of the ones that people are interested in that aren't kind of the obvious ones are the continuing the universal preschool. The education workforce supports is something we've been all talking about for quite a while. It really relates to House Bill 319 from last session. That was Chair Tipton's omnibus bill. It really got pared down, but I think some of those things we may see come back now that the budget session is approaching and they have a chance to fund some of those priorities. Pets is another big one. We've had a few meetings talking about that. They've added to the capacity of CATs over the last few years and want to make sure that they can continue to provide the same level of service going forward, but we'll need some additional money for that. Read to Succeed was one of the big wins last year in the session. And oh, sorry, Robin's saying we haven't sent them over yet. So Read to Succeed was a big win last session, and Mickey and her team are just asking for some additional supports for that. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So in addition to those ABRs, we have a few other things that are on the radar right now, some of which are further along than others. So if you'll remember, OCTE in 2022 got a really big bump in funding, and that allowed them to, for the first time ever, fund all CTE programs equally, no matter what the location of the program is. And so what they're trying to do now is codify this funding distribution formula. So we've been working with Senator Givens on a bill draft. So we're getting close to a final bill draft. I think it's likely that we'll see a companion bill get filed in the House. That should hopefully speed up the process. So I'm hoping that this is when we can see get moving early in the session. And again, I don't think it'll be very controversial in the sense that it will finally allow them to fund all CTE programs at the same level, regardless of the location, something that we've never been able to do before. Continuing to raise awareness and support for the two Kentucky state schools, KSB and KSD. Again, OTL is asking for some changes, statutory changes around the advanced placement funding. So right now, the funding appropriated, one, can only be spent on test exams, and two, does not roll over. And so those are the two changes that we're really pushing for there, is to allow the funds to roll over, but then also to allow for funds that are not expended on exams to be used for supports for both teachers and students, with the goal of increasing test scores. So we'll make a push on that. Then this fall, we asked all of the policy advisors and all of the departments here at KDE to start looking at any statutory cleanups that could be made that would essentially make life easier in the districts. So things like reports that are required but aren't really utilized, data that's required but isn't being used, things like that. We're also looking for, old statutes that have been superseded but they never went back and cleaned up the old ones. So just some statutory cleanup. And then along kind of the lines of what Shay was talking about earlier, if you'll remember House Bill 678 from 2022, it was essentially a pilot project to give districts more flexibility with the facility process. So I think there's interest in codifying that, making those changes permanent. It wasn't really called a pilot project in 678, but it only ran for 2 years. So that will expire if we don't make some additional changes there. I believe that Robin and her team have already started talking to some other stakeholders. So I'm hopeful that this is when we can get across the finish line next session. And then they also want to amend that KRS statute there to give some additional design plan approval to the districts. So those are I'll back up on the slide real quick. So those are all things that are on the radar right now. I believe someone asked Natasha about, I lost it already, codifying some of the language around preschool and kindergarten. That was not something we had talked about, but I have started having some conversations with folks in the department now that we've seen that one pop up. So we'll continue to have some conversations around that and see if it's something that gets added to the list for next session. All right, so these are all things that are happening kind of from the department standpoint. If you go to the next slide, I just wanted to talk quickly about some of the things you might want to expect from the General Assembly side of things. Early literacy got done last year with the Read to Succeed. I think that there'll still be a continued push for that. Along with that, numeracy is now kind of cropping up as the next target. So what can we do that's similar to Read to Succeed, but for numeracy? I don't know if this will, I think we'll see bills get filed this year. I don't know if it's something that they'll do or if they'll kind of wait and give the early literacy project some time to get established and get going, and then add in the numeracy maybe in a year from now. But I think the conversation is definitely going to get started. Teacher prep programs, I think we'll see some conversations around that, both related to early literacy and numeracy, but also just generally making sure that candidates are coming out as prepared as they can be and ready to kind of hit the ground running. So the student funding formula is one that I think Chair Tipton introduced a bill about a few years ago. I think we'll probably see, again, some bills get filed around that. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. I don't really think it will this year, but I do think the conversation will continue. We'll definitely see several bills filed around DEI initiatives and offices. I think we've seen this in other states, so I think there's a high likelihood that we'll essentially see something eventually pass that prohibits state agencies from having DEI offices as we have in other states. Then the last item that's come up, we have the seven Supreme Court seats on the KBE all expire, or all those terms expire in April. So they're all on the same schedule essentially. And I think there's going to be interest in staggering those out going forward, so you don't have all 7 seats up for appointment or reappointment at the same time. So I think it's likely that we'll see a few people get appointed for a year or two, and then, a couple for maybe 2 to 3 years, and so on and so forth, to start staggering out those seats. And I think that's something that both the board and the department will support. So anyway, that's kind of the quick version of what to expect from the session. Obviously, it's a long session. We will see, I would say, close to 1,000 bills get filed. Obviously, not all of those will get assigned to committee and move forward, but we will very likely see several hundred make it across the finish line and get enacted before it's all said and done. So it'll be a busy session. As always, education is going to be high on the list. But hopefully we'll see some good things come out of it like we did in the last budget, and we'll move forward as always. Are there any questions?
If I may, Chair Ballinger, Robbie Fletcher again, Lawrence County.
Yes, go ahead, Superintendent Fletcher.
Thank you, ma'am. Another thing that you mentioned that for some reason we've kind of lost some conversation on this, but I think it's very, very important. Any language that we can still include about codifying full-day kindergarten, in order to get that full funding for that, I think that's very important too. So I would hope we would not lose that from our radar of having a codifying full-day kindergarten. That's very, very important in my view, and I think it is across the state too. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. That was one of my points too, is that's got to be on the list.
Chair Ballinger, if I can jump in for just a minute, we are having those conversations already with legislators about permanent statutory language for full day kindergarten per pupil for SEEK. It's authorized now in the budget bill, and so we don't want to see that go away. Sometimes we do see in language like that, they'll put it in another budget bill, to continue it. We would much prefer to have it in the statute, so it's codified. The amount for full day, for full pupil funding for kindergarten is in our base right now. So the money's there. We just need to get the language to match the money. Thank you for letting me just kind of add that comment.
Yes, thank you for jumping in and adding that comment. I will say, Mr. Perry, as I've been preparing for this meeting this week, I've had multiple superintendents reach out to me, specifically making certain that this item was brought up on the meeting today. I think this is very important for superintendents, that this is codified. Without it being codified, it's very difficult for us to make long-range plans. So thank you for discussing that today. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Terry, I would just like to say to Mr. Perry and Robin is the equalization of the nickels, making sure that is also on the priority list, especially with as many districts are waiting to make sure that those nickels are equalized.
Yes, that's going to be very instrumental for school districts in moving forward with any construction project. So that I appreciate you bringing that to attention.
Dr. Ballinger,
Yes.
Lenny Whalen, and Robin, I don't know, I'm assuming you're still on. This is just a comment I want to make. And one thing that I'm always concerned about is at the state level, when they start talking about money for raises, and I know that we're talking about possibly putting that in the seat base, but one thing that's always a concern for me is, you know, that those raise figures grow every year. You know, by the time that you give whatever percentage raise you're going to give this year, you know, that's going to increase next year by rank, step, etc. So I really am hopeful that as these discussions are taking place, it would really be nice if there was something built in incrementally to where that steps up every year, to where, you know, the seek base doesn't stay stagnant for 5 years because, you know, we raised at X amount of dollars this year, especially with inflation and a lot of the challenges that we're having. You know, that base really needs to incrementally step up slightly every year. And I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I've had lengthy discussions with several of you on here about that, but that's always a major concern for me.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions about our legislative priorities for the upcoming session?
Dr. Ballinger, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
Just curious on the preschool funding. A couple of my concerns there are expanding access to preschool. I worry about 1, facilities, 2, staff. So what is I guess, what are the finer details of what that funding might look like? Because I worry about that when I hear talks about universal pre-K. Like, that's fantastic, but I don't have rooms to put them in right now, and I don't have staff to teach them. So how are we going to solve those problems as well? And Lenny, I completely agree with you and your comments on the teacher salary and making sure that that is not just a 1 year, one-time gift, because those salaries are there forever once those scales get changed. So that's got to be some ongoing funding.
Sorry,
Thank you for your comments. Yeah. Mr. Perry, can you speak to Superintendent Molly's question?
I have not been part of discussions that have really touched on that, but it's a valid concern, obviously, and one we'll definitely have to talk about. I don't know if Robin or Che is still on, if they've had conversations on the facility side about any of that.
This is Robin. We have had a lot of those conversations with districts. I think we have some districts, just like we do with any issue that comes up, we have some districts that are ready. You know, they would be ready to have a universal preschool in their community, a universal preschool type program. And I've even heard from some superintendents are, you know, I have a waiting list. I could have more kids in. I have space to do it, but you know, the eligibility doesn't allow for it. So I think there's conversations based upon where your community is. I do recognize in talking with superintendents that some of you just don't have the space for it right now. So we don't really want it to turn out to be a mandate that you have to do it. But many times you got to have this conversation and get it started and have it repeated over and over before we get some traction on it. So I think our hope is to really try to get some conversations going and some traction associated with an additional budget request. As we move forward, you know, the Kentucky Board of Education has said very strongly that they believe in universal preschool. And so we have costed out what it would take to do that. I do hear the comments. It's the practical application. How do you do it? Even though it's a great idea and everybody wants, you know, universal preschool, but how do you do it and what are the logistics behind it? So I'm sure in our conversations with legislators that we will have those conversations. Is there a middle ground, or is there a phase in, or is there something that looks a little different that we can get it rolling? Maybe that's where we start. So I appreciate the comments about it. We do understand that. If anyone has any ideas about maybe how it might impact your community specifically, that maybe you're not quite ready, but you might be ready in a year or two or in 2 years? How do we roll that out so it looks more like a phased approach instead of just a mandate to everyone?
Thank you, Ms. Kinney, for those comments and that clarification. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Perry regarding our legislative priorities? Okay, if we have no more questions, Mr. Perry, thank you for listening to our concerns. We very much appreciate that.
Sure, and please feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions about legislative happenings or going on in the annex or capital. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for taking time to join us today. Since our agenda was developed, we had a superintendent reach out and ask if we could provide an update on NTI. So with us today, we have Sarah Snipes and Mr. Stephen Kissinger from the Division of Innovative Learning to give us an update on NTI.
Thank you, Chair Ballinger, and thank you all here on the Advisory Council for giving us the opportunity to hopefully provide some NTI updates, as well as those post-COVID changes that we want to make sure that are clear and communicated to you all, as we've already seen the need for NTI arise through illness this fall, much earlier than those typical snow days start to begin. So thanks for your patience in navigating with us, and we hope to provide some resources and updates that you'll find helpful. Just wanted to begin by saying that our NTI point of contacts and you as superintendents will receive this week an updated copy of our non-traditional instruction guidance document and data standard that is now live on the KDE NTI website if you're eager to dive in. And those are live, as I mentioned now. A friendly reminder that if you, as an individual, wish to receive correspondence about NTI throughout the school year, your district will need to update their active and inactive contacts with in-person role manager. So normally those correspondents are not emailed directly to superintendents unless they are identified in the system as an active contact. Districts can update and maintain their own contacts with in-person role manager, and the district's web app admin should have access to all of those features. In terms of post-COVID NTI updates, last year we did go back to our rotational end-of-year monitoring that ceased during that COVID period. So the goal here is to monitor all districts active within NTI within a 5-year span. And this is, of course, contingent on which districts use NTI days going forward. Our districts are encouraged to actively create your own internal NTI artifact collection systems in preparation for possible selection within the end-of-year monitoring. So monitoring will now include uploading teacher assignments that correspond with completed student work of said assignment. The language within the guidance document states lesson plans or teacher assignments. So our ask here is really that the student artifacts and evidence that are submitted match the corresponding teacher assignment that was provided to those students. For each NTI day, a district will need to upload one paired teacher-student artifact at each grade level K through 12, covering a variety of core content areas and district-chosen electives. District must keep their samples on site for a minimum of 2 years in case of an audit or future monitoring request. And then again, districts will be notified mid-spring semester if you've been selected for monitoring. The deadline for data entry on Infinite Campus has been set for April 1st going forward. And we would just love to kind of open it up here to see if you have specific questions. Our team's program consultant for the non-traditional instruction program is here with us as well, Mr. Steve Kissinger. And so we're happy to take any questions or concerns that you might also have.
Superintendent Ballinger, Michael Ford in Russell County. I won't use the term, it's not a lesson plan, but I think there's some different expectations on what student or what our staff are supposed to keep documentation of. I'm using the term lesson plan pretty loosely there, but there's a change regarding that coming forward, correct?
Steve, do you want me to speak to that?
I could jump in on that. Okay. The only thing we were trying to do this year is to clarify districts tend to do really well in the elementary grades of linking the actual assignment for the day with the students who completed it. So when I look at it and the committee looks at it, they're like, okay, they did something on this day. They completed it. So going forward, we're just trying to make it to where it's linked up better in the upper grades, middle school and high school, to where if it's an English assignment, it does not have to be lesson plans. I know some districts do that they have the student completed assignment on hand with that. So we can look at it and say, okay, on NTI day 3, Russell County did this, and here's the teacher assignment, and here's what they turned in, and they link together. Check it off. We can go ahead and send that forward to the commissioner for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Ballinger, a quick follow-up to that.
Yes, go ahead.
Curious as to how, I know in our elementary schools, they have utilized choice boards and how that might fit into that dynamic with linking assignment with actual work that's been done, if there's a choice board that the students have an opportunity to choose which thing they're going to do.
It's the same thing, as long as there's a picture of like the choice board there and it's got the teacher assignment, and then the student, when they turn it in, it's got the title of the assignment on there, that links it up. So yeah, that the student choice can still be part of that.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be a problem.
Do we have any further questions regarding NTI? If we have no further questions, I would like to thank Ms. Sarah Snipes and Mr. Steve Kissinger for joining us today and providing that NTI update. We very much appreciate you taking your time to provide that to our council today. Next on our agenda is adjournment, but before we adjourn, I would like to note our next meeting is scheduled to be held virtually on November 15th. However, since throughout this meeting, I've been receiving multiple text messages asking if we could meet in person for our next meeting on November 15th. So I will note that I will work with Ms. Natasha Stein to reserve a place for us to meet on that date in person. And we can also provide a virtual option for those of you that are not able to travel to Frankfurt on that day. And before we adjourn as well, thank you, Natasha, for organizing the meeting and for lining up all of our speakers. It's been a very informative day, and I appreciate your assistance in that. Does anyone have any last questions or comments that you would like to make before we adjourn? Again, I apologize for the technical difficulty that we had today with today's meeting, and hopefully if we're able to meet in person in November, that will clear a lot of those issues up. With no further questions, I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, we have a second by Mr. Superintendent Michael Ford. So at that time, I would like all those in favor of adjourning, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.